we talked about the provisional licenses and then the certificate of operation. They will have that pre-approval inspection that must take place within 9 months of the issuance of the provisional license. And there's also compliance inspections conducted with or without notice that are covered in greater detail within the rule. It requires that every batch of plant material be tested by a licensed testing laboratory in accordance with the testing laboratory rules before being packaged and transported. Employee identification cards. This requires every employee of a cultivator, processor, or testing laboratory to apply to the department prior to engaging work with the entity. The rules designate 2 types of employees. We have type 1, which will be granted access to all areas of the cultivator facility, including the security room and management areas, which will also include the safe and other things that we want to restrict access to just the type 1 employees. Within that group of type 1, each facility will designate a key employee, and that will be the point of contact with the department moving forward at that facility, and the individual that we will hold responsible for making sure that they comply with their initial application as well as the rules that we have established. Type 2 will be granted access to all medical marijuana cultivation areas, but prohibited from entering the security room, management areas, and other areas established in rule. And it's also important to note, you'll see in the rules, we will give the facilities some discretion in who needs to be within the cultivation areas, because that's something that they typically regulate pretty heavily, who's in those particular rooms. Fee schedules. This will establish the fees for applications, certificate of operations, renewals, lost, destroyed, or stolen certificates, and employee identification cards. For employee IDs, the renewal will be every 2 years. For certificate of operations, it'll be every year. And the proposed non-refundable fees for cultivators are as follows. Application fee for level 1 cultivators of $20,000, level 2 cultivators of $2,000. The license fee for level 1 will be $180,000, level 2 will be $18,000. The renewal fee, which you'll see is just a combination of the application and renewal, or the license fee, will be $200,000 for level 1 and $20,000 for level 2. And employee ID card application is $100. Within the rule packet, I could have gone on and listed a few more, but you'll see the product registration requirement that I mentioned previously with the department, as well as any fees if they lose their cards or need to reissue a certificate of operation. Transportation. The facility must maintain a transportation log and provide that to the receiving facility and the department the day before transit. It will require vehicle security standards as well as employee travel requirements for each transportation of medical marijuana that is made. And all medical marijuana will be transported by the cultivator, excluding batch samples for laboratory testing, which could be transported by licensed laboratory employees. Loss and theft reporting. This puts in place reporting requirements for suspected or actual loss, theft, or diversion. It requires notice to the department and law enforcement within 24 hours and further investigation within 10 days of that notice. And that further investigation, the requirements are set forth in the rule itself, but it would include reviewing that video footage and also sealing any records or footage necessary to investigate. Erin touched on this briefly in her overview, but it also establishes the 500-foot distance from what we are defining as prohibited facilities and how specifically that will be measured to ensure it's consistent across the different facilities. It aligns with the revised code 3796. And 3796 also required that we establish a rule on how to handle cultivators if they are operating before a prohibited facility moves within 500 feet of the existing cultivation facility. And so the rule sets forth how that will be handled. From an enforcement standpoint, it establishes the actions that the department may take if a licensed entity commits what's called a prohibited act as defined in the rule. The revised code establishes that suspension revocation would be under Chapter 119, and the rules are consistent with that. Prohibited acts. It lists the activities that would give rise to sanction or other disciplinary measures. As you'll see, the first couple prohibited acts that are listed are consistent with what we saw in the full memo. And so it's helping these facilities make sure that they maintain a facility that will keep it within the state and limit the potential for the federal government to come in. So we thought those were important to include, as well as any acts that would be deemed not in the interest of public health, welfare, and safety. Advertising. It requires the department approval of an advertisement before it is disseminated to the public. It prohibits specific content as well as the distribution mediums. Establish restrictions on the placement and appearance of advertisements. And it also looks at a cultivator's use of social media or their web presence and places restrictions on those mediums. Product registration, this will apply to cultivators, and there will also be a similar requirement for our processors to register every strain of medical marijuana cultivated at the facility or medical marijuana product down the line. And this will be a one-time $100 fee. That goes through the 42-page rules we drop right in front of you. And I'm happy to start answering questions.
So let's if there's general questions to start, I think that's fine, but what I'm trying to avoid is Justin having to jump all over the rules. So if we can take a systematic walk through the rules and section by section, we'll bring our questions forward. Otherwise, this is going to be all over the place. I like Jim's point that in the future we'll have a little bit advanced look at these so we can intelligently take some look at that as well. So let's go all the way back to the beginning, and outside of the definition piece, which I think is going to be relatively well managed across all the agencies. I'll defer to public comment on that. Why don't we start around page 5 and start to walk our way through some of the licensing procedures. If we have specific questions in that area, we'll continue to just kind of walk through all the 40 pages. So,
yes, sir. On the licensing, the chain of ownership, how are you going to monitor that to keep a monopoly, or not that this would ever happen in Ohio, but organized crime people taking over?
And so, two things we have there. We have the restriction on ownership, which would prevent the monopoly. So the fact that they can only hold one cultivator license at a time would prevent maybe some successful cultivators operating in the state to buy up the other licenses. So that prevents the monopoly. From crime coming in and trying to get a license, we set forth the requirements if there is a change in ownership. And one of those requirements is we go back and look at the criteria that would be in the original application. We require them to submit that. So it would be the background checks. It would be information on the individuals with a percentage or more interest in the cultivator. And we would
so you're going to go like the casinos and landfills, the background part?
Yes. Yeah. Yep.
Anything else in the licensing rules as you see them before you right now? I'm understanding we'll have plenty of time for additional comment. We're going down a path right here, but in case anything jumped out at you right away, you want to get clarification on it. Yeah.
No, it's my frustration of trying to read this fast enough to even pose a question.
So Justin, I'm sorry, were you going to ask a question?
No.
So in terms of these licenses being provisional, is it provisional in the sense that they have to show the significant progression, or within the 9-month period the ability to be operational? Is it provisional in that sense only? Or can you flesh that out for us?
I can, yeah. And I think I'll get to your question here. It is, we would like to see the progress, and we'd like to see them meet what they said they could meet within the 9-month period. And they will all be aware that that 9-month period exists. There are measures in place within the rule that if they can't meet it because of the local jurisdictional issues that we discussed, maybe zoning permits that's preventing them from doing it, there is language in there that would allow them additional time to continue to work towards that certificate of operation.
Because part of the concern is, as you look at what's required in the actual application, one of them in K is a copy of the current local zoning ordinance, and that could present a lot of limitations in terms of and some question marks.
It could.
Yes.
I think this is appropriate under this section. What was the basis for the determination of the total square footage that was being divided up?
For both level 1 and level 2? You know, there are a number of different factors that you consider when you try to project the demand and then how to meet that supply. And so what we did is we looked at other states where maybe they had a plant count, which didn't allow cultivators enough time to arguably put the plants in the ground and continue to produce enough medical marijuana to scale up with that demand. We have heard similar concerns about canopy issues. And so the square footage was the route that we took. And talking with industry experts, consultant that we worked with, we looked at that square footage and said, okay, what would be a good number that would allow us to meet the demand within years 1 and 2, but would still give the cultivators some flexibility to produce, cultivate additional marijuana. And those are the numbers that we settled on for the proposed rule draft.
So can you share with us what those expectations were for that market in the first 2 years that then would have predicated those type of limitations?
As far as
what you're projecting that you use to come up with the 1,500 square feet.
Yeah, so I would say, we didn't come up with any specific numbers, but we looked to, again, 24 states have done this, and so we looked at the states that did it most recently, the Illinois, the Connecticut's, the New York's, and we looked at, what is maybe keeping that patient number down? Could it be significant barriers for the physicians? Could it be that they don't have pain or PTSD or other qualifying medical conditions that would make it difficult for the doctors to recommend? Mm-hmm. And what we did is we didn't come up with a specific number, but we used that to create I hate using the word scalability, but that's what it needs to be. And so that's kind of the different things that we looked at. And there's a number of different factors.
And I'm not trying to put you on the spot.
Yeah.
But is it safe to assume that Illinois, Connecticut, and New York were your models in terms of what you're projecting for patient count?
No, it's not safe to say. But it is safe to say from a regulatory standpoint, what we identified right off the bat is no state has a perfect model. And so in our conversations with the regulators and with different people in the industry, we started to see what maybe some states did better than the others, and we used those as the model. We never used a model state for those numbers.
Would you identify Illinois, Connecticut, and New York as model states?
We looked at those states, yes, as well as Maryland, Nevada, New Mexico, and others.
I had a quick question about the provisional licenses being issued. It mentions that there is kind of a cap for that in terms of designated territories. Mm-hmm. And I don't see that designated territories are defined, so I'm just wondering if you could elaborate on that.
And that's something we're looking at closely right now. Again, the key there is trying to allow for accessibility. Understanding that cultivators can't sell to the patients directly, so it's not as much about patient accessibility as it is the businesses being able to operate efficiently, minimizing the amount of time that medical marijuana may be transported on the road, which could raise some risks in and of itself, and just looking at it from the ease of doing business standpoint. So those are still being developed, and I'm sure as we set on some territories, I'm sure they'll be shared with everyone.
Let's continue to move through. I think the application process is relatively detailed, and we'll let, I think, some of the experts in the area give us specific feedback on some of the nuts and bolts of that. Anything around the concept of financial responsibility that you are concerned with or would like to give comment on as we continue to move through these rules? That's on page 12. Okay.
Can I ask one other question?
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of a potential request for proposal, obviously we can expect a lot of the criteria that's been laid out here in the regulatory to end up in that. Is there an idea of at what point after these regulations get blessed and go through JCAR and CIS, that RFP would present itself, and is there an idea for how long then the review process may take? And the reason why I asked, I'm trying to get a concept for patient concerns, how soon the availability of the medicine may be.
And it's a great question. It's something we've looked at. We don't have a set date, but we understand that there is a 9-month amount of time that they would have to meet all the requirements, and that's, it's possible, but, that we push and hit that 9-month time frame. And so that would put us, from the time the rules are effective, add that 9 months, and I think we're roughly 7 months out of the effective date. And so it will need to move quickly once the rules are final and effective, but as far as an exact date, I don't have that, but it would be, yeah.
Okay. Continuing to move on through, we're looking at the certificates. I think, again, that might be sufficiently detailed. We can take written comment on. Page 13, the uninterrupted supply of medical marijuana. Any comments or questions around that area? Okay. I think the transfer of ownership was well defined, unless there are comments from the committee. Yeah, go ahead.
I did have one. Related to the uninterrupted supply.
Mm-hmm.
So I see that there needs to be a maintenance of 50 pounds at any given time for immediate sale. And then, that works in conjunction with an expiration date as well. So is there concern about